I just wanted to let everyone know we're supposed to open the meeting at 5 o'clock, but I don't have a quorum yet.
So we have the two.
Yes.
Sorry about that.
All right, we do now have a quorum, so I will call this Board of Selectmen's meeting to order for August 4th. Thank you, everybody, for patiently waiting. Sorry about the delay. Roll call, we have Phil Crossman, Jake Thompson, and myself, Eric Gasparini. Donald Poole and Pam Alley are absent. Approve agenda. Any additions, subtractions?
Just under communications, just a response from the county commissioner.
I move we approve the agenda as amended.
Second.
Seconded by Jake Thompson. All those in favor? All right, we're going to old business, Hurricane Island Foundation tax abatement request.
All right, so the application came in early July, about a month ago. Of course, we're here with the abatement hearing date. With us is our attorney, as well as Wes, our assessor, as well as Bo Hoppin with the Hurricane Island Foundation and their attorney, Bill Harwood. Bo, do you have anyone else? I think Dave, I see Dave Conover on there as well.
Yep, our board chair, David Conover, is also here.
Great. So our attorney did share with you kind of an outline in your packets there, kind of to go through. I don't know if you want to, if you wanted just to kind of go over your position. Again, they've had the opportunity to see the abatement. You have kind of, this is what I shared with them back when you submitted it for the last board meeting that we had it on the agenda, just to try and summarize the document you submitted. So I don't know if there's anything in there that you wanted to relay to the board or emphasize or share with the board as part of the hearing.
Yeah, I'll start, and then Bill may jump in here. But from my point of view, just to refresh everyone's memory, I'm the executive director for the Hurricane Island Foundation, Hurricane Island Center for Science and Leadership. And we've been working with the town on this tax exemption issue in some respects dating back to 2015 when predecessors to me, to everyone here actually, submitted an initial request for exemption, and then we submitted it again in the spring of 2019, and we had that exemption request moved to a court hearing. And on our position on this is that we really feel strongly, myself and our board, that Maine law entitles us to an exemption. And that's really all this is about for us, is that we're pursuing, what we feel like are our rights under Maine law. And we understand there's some complications to this. And in particular, there's a question, the court's hearing, it was remanded back to the town on the question of us, as our primary work as a scientific institution. And that seems to be what's at question here. And this exemption request is, we were up against a deadline to file it. I mean, the abatement request, excuse me, we were up against the deadline to file it. And so that's why we're sitting here today. But we fully hope that there's a way to come to a resolution on this, and we're open-minded on that, and we're still open to working on that. And on that, I think I'll turn it over to Bill.
Thank you, Bo, and thank you to the selectmen for hearing us this evening. I know you've got a lot on your plate these days, and I'm sorry that this is taking up some of your time and space. As Bo said, we've been at this for 5 years, and we think the time has come to finally resolve it. We are hoping that you agree with that. We've been working at this a long time. There's been a lot of attorneys' fees, a lot of hearings, a lot of paper, and I think we really are ready to bring this to a conclusion. We think the Superior Court last spring in Rockland got it right and essentially found all of the reasons why we are a tax exempt research institution. We are engaged in education and we are engaged in research. That is all we really do. And I don't think the court had any problem with that. The tax assessor threw up a number of issues that he thought were relevant, and I think the court went through very carefully on each one. I'm happy to go through those with you tonight again, but I think the bottom line is that the court essentially said that we are a tax exempt entity, but it did remand it back for the tax assessor to make that finding. We're still waiting for the tax assessor to let us know how he's going to handle this. But in the meantime, you have the authority as the selectman to conclude this whole matter by finding we're a tax exempt entity and deciding on how much of our rebate we're entitled to, how much of the abatement we're entitled to. And I think it's pretty clear that for the first 2 years, we are entitled to it. There is a timing issue on the third year, and we can wait and refile that in September if it becomes necessary to do so. But as I said, I think this case is becoming clearer and clearer. We are anxious to wrap it up, work with you. We'd like to wrap it up tonight. If you would like to engage in some settlement discussions with us to try and wrap it up on terms that are more favorable, we're open to that. But we think the time has come to bring this case, this whole matter to a close, and we hope the town of Vinyl Haven welcomes the Hurricane Island Foundation as a first-rate scientific education and research institution and values it as a taxpayer and corporate citizen in the town, just as much as the Hurricane Island Foundation values the town of Vinyl Haven and being part of that town. This is a relationship that works both ways, and we are very hopeful that we can get beyond this issue of the tax issue and move on and support each other in our endeavors. And I'm happy to try and answer any questions or go further into the issues as the selectmen wish.
Want to hear from our attorney, or
What's that?
if you want to hear from our attorney?
I would like to, thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Dave, if you're still on there, I don't know if you want to kind of help the board with what you had provided us, or kind of helping them with the next step through this.
Sure. So I would just say that, as Bill just indicated, beyond just this abatement request before you, the foundation has the ongoing proceeding in front of the assessor and on remand from the Superior Court. And so, I would echo Bill's sentiment that the board has the authority to settle that both of those matters, and that's something the board has the authority to engage in discussions about. And so if the board wanted to take its time here to do that, then could certainly do so. Separately, in terms of if the board chooses to focus narrowly on the abatement request, then there are a number of preliminary issues, I guess, that the board will have to piece through, just because with the tax assessment statutes, the board does not have unlimited discretion in the abatement context. And so I tried to draw up just sort of a choose your own adventure to at least step through the facts that would need to be carved out. I think that the applicants, up on the screen, we see on the second page there, the 3 different amounts for each year for which they're seeking abatement. And in terms of, I think that the board, if it does step through this, it will have to kind of parse through where those numbers come from out of the commitment book. Because as we know, there are some amount of taxes have been assessed to the Hurricane Island Foundation, and others have been assessed to the Hurricane Island Trust. And so one of the things that the board would need to decide, as Bill indicated, I think, is whether or not this Hurricane Island Foundation is a literary and scientific organization. If the board does reach that conclusion, there are still some other facts that it would have to parse through to figure out what that would mean. For instance, it would need to determine under the statute any buildings that were used for staff housing are not exempt. And so it would need to parse through whether there were any buildings that were used for staff housing on each of the 3 years. And then it separately has to kind of address the issue about whether it's dealing with only those taxes that have been assessed to the foundation, or also dealing with some subset of the taxes that have been assessed to the trust, but that the foundation has been paying under a contractual commitment with the trust. So mostly I'm here to just be an aid in process, and you know, I can help facilitate any discussion you want to have with the applicant on settlement, or separately, you know, we can parse through the questions. I mean, most of them I think will be factual questions for the applicant, and then we can talk through whether you know, what the appropriate process is depending on where the board comes out on each of the forks in that kind of choose your own adventure outline that I tried to put together.
Great, thanks, Dave.
I can't see this.
If I might respond to one, I think Dave gave a good summary, but I'd like briefly to respond to the one point on the staff housing.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of confusion around this issue. The statute doesn't apply to temporary housing when employees are sent from their home to a specific location to do their work, and while they're there, they have temporary housing. I think what Mr. Kalin is referring to is the situation more analogous to the president of a college, and the president, he or she, is given a lovely fancy home on the campus, and that is their residence. That is where they live, that is where they vote, that is where they register their automobile. And in that case, it's entirely appropriate to reserve that portion of the campus as taxable property. That's not at all what we're talking about here. The only people who sleep on Hurricane Island are those people who are doing their job temporarily. They all have homes on the mainland that are their principal residence. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. We can get into it more if you'd like, but I don't think that's an issue here in this case.
Okay, so let's start off with the tax payment questions, shall we?
On the paper.
Right here, yes, on the, if you look at page 1, right here, outline design review.
Yeah.
So my initial inclination is to not offer any tax abatement at all. I don't, the legal standard here is pretty clear. The real estate and personal property owned and occupied or used solely for their own purposes, et cetera, et cetera. In this case, the Hurricane Island Foundation does not own the property. I don't understand, you know, Hurricane Island Foundation wants to acquire the property from the Gaston family And then we'd be talking about a completely different situation, obviously. I don't think anybody on this board or our legal counsel denies that the Hurricane Island Foundation is a scientific institution, but they do not own the property.
That's certainly, that was one of the metrics in here. David pointed out, one of the first ones is, and I think Bill had acknowledged too, is there was 3 tax years sought for abatement. In the statute, it reads at least 1 year and no more than 3, or
So they
that
can't,
wording.
for right now, the 2019, 2020 taxes do not meet that standard at any rate. So should we take this one motion at 1 year at a time? Is there specific language I need to?
So I mean, usually I think towards the, at the end of the hearing, and as you make a decision, whether it's tonight or at a future date, you would have established findings of facts. And so this document kind of helps you outline those findings of facts, for each tax year or each situation or circumstance in which has been outlined here. So I don't know that you would need to make motions on all of these things now, but to go down through those, and if there are questions that come up that can be answered tonight, based on any of those, we could certainly ask for clarification.
Yeah, I think that is the sticking point, is about the ownership and the.
Right. I did have a chance to read this before.
I looked at it too.
No, okay.
Yeah, I think we should go through it and not make a motion or vote, but just get our facts straight, decide what, at another time to vote, do you think?
So what are they asking for, just the $8,329 that they paid for the Hurricane Island Foundation? Is that what the ask was for?
No, so it's the tax that's assessed to the Hurricane Island Foundation as person in possession. I assume for last year was about the amount you referenced. The total value of what was assessed, again, as person in possession, was $647,200. That was the building values in which they occupy on that island. So the tax value for 1920, the most recent tax year, was for $8,329.46. In the request for abatement, you'll see the amounts of $30,000, $12.84, $28,000, $27,000. But those are the amounts that the Hurricane Island Foundation had paid to the town of Vinyl Haven, but not necessarily assessed by the town of Vinyl Haven for all of that amount. The difference is the agreement that they have with the trust, in which they'll pay a certain percentage of the taxes assessed to the trust. So that's a potential challenge or point to review as you go through this.
I'd be happy to address the lease versus ownership issue if the board would like.
Yeah, I'd like.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. This issue was raised way back at the beginning, and I think it's been pretty heavily beaten to a dead horse. The Superior Court judge found conclusively on the law that ownership in the form of a deed in the Registry of Deeds is not required for you to be a taxpayer with standing. The taxpayer assessor in our original application found we were a taxpayer with standing to seek this exemption. But that was raised again in the Superior Court, and the judge went through very carefully the cases that have been decided by the Maine Supreme Court. And it is very clear that you do not need a deed to be considered a quote unquote owner for tax purposes, and a 40-year lease, which gives the foundation exclusive use of 2/3 of the island for scientific research and education. And the only other person who has any rights to that is the landlord for the limited purpose of enforcing the lease. The court just didn't have any trouble with that and concluded that we were the owner for purposes of this property tax case, and that we should be treated as the owner for purposes of property tax. And I'm not sure that issue is still alive at this point, having been addressed by the Superior Court in Rockland and ruled in our favor.
So I don't know if Dave or Wes, and I think Wes I saw was on here, that may or may not be different than what the statute regards in terms of assessment and real estate taxation, in the sense that the Hurricane Island Foundation was not assessed taxes for a big portion of what you're seeking in abatement. I don't know if Dave or Wes, if you wanted to.
Yeah, I'll address just briefly that I think we're talking about two slightly different issues. And so I might disagree slightly with Bill about whether the court has conclusively resolved what I guess I would put as the ownership prong of the tax abatement analysis at the end. This is more of an upfront issue and one that the Superior Court wasn't presented with. It did not have in front of it the entries from the commitment book, and it was not dealing with the specific, it certainly wasn't dealing with either of the 2 years that the board would be dealing with here. But the issue is slightly different from what Bill was describing, and what I agree with him on is that if you conclude that Hurricane Island Foundation is a tax exempt entity, then for the prong on whether they own certain property, a deed is not required. At that point, you might get at the point of stepping through the lease to see whether or not there are sufficient ownership rights to treat that as owned property for that purpose. But I think that's kind of a future step in the analysis. This is the first part that is essentially, if you look at, I think together with each of your packets, and I think Bill and the foundation would have gotten this as 3 PDFs that were behind my choose your own adventure thing. But what I did is I took just the portions of the tax commitment book that are at issue here. And so, that's if you have it in front of you, for any particular year. So we'll start with 2017 to 2018. On the top of it, it'll say real estate tax commitment book. And says -11.410. That date on the upper right-hand side, 9/18/2017, that's the commitment date. And then this is that really long document that the town has that has all the properties and the different accounts. And what I did is I just whited out everything except the one that goes to the Hurricane Island Foundation and the one that goes to the Hurricane Island Trust. So you can see the Hurricane Island Foundation has account number 777, and the amount of taxes they were assessed in 2017-2018 was $7,384.55. If you go down and you look at the Hurricane Island Trust, they were assessed $42,121.16. So if you look at what the Hurricane Island Foundation is seeking in their application, in 2017-2018, they're seeking an amount of $27,317.59. Now you'll notice that number that they're seeking is neither of the two individual numbers nor the total of the two individual numbers. And this presents just some complications for the select board's authority. And it presents it in two ways. The first is Hurricane Island Foundation clearly has the authority as a taxpayer to seek abatement for the taxes that were assessed to it. So it can seek abatement of that $7,384.55 if it meets the standard. I am not aware of any case law that has ever held that someone can seek abatement for someone taxes assessed to someone else. And indeed, I am aware of case law to the contrary. And so even if the Hurricane Island Foundation prevails on all issues and is tax exempt, that would not, as a practical matter, mean that the assessment to account 582, which is the Hurricane Island Trust of 42,121.16 was an illegal assessment. So we have to decide kind of one, whether we're dealing with only those amounts that were assessed to account 777 Hurricane Island Foundation, or if we're including some portion of what was assessed to the trust. And my opinion is that the selectmen don't have the authority to deal with the portion that was assessed to the trust. And the reason for that is twofold. One, the other is that because they wouldn't be seeking an abatement of the entire amount. If you are seeking an abatement that some of the property assessed was tax exempt, but not all of it, then that actually is supposed to be brought first as an overvaluation. So this is just the difficulty, and I want to step back and say, I would echo Bill's sentiment that if the town is so inclined, there are ways to look at the global picture to peel back some of this onion. But if the board is dealing with the property tax abatement, then separate and apart, well before it gets to the issue about whether the lease is sufficient evidence of ownership, it has to piece through which taxpayer was actually assessed which dollar amount, and figure out exactly how many dollars it's dealing with in its consideration.
If I may,
The first
briefly.
Just, we had a little lag on our end. Dave, what was your first point you made there? Sorry, that's where it lagged down.
So the first point was the question of standing, whether the Hurricane Island Foundation has standing to seek the abatement of assessed to the trust. And then the second issue is that even if they did have, is this proceeding the proper proceeding and seek illegality, essentially, that it was an exemption, exempt if they're not seeking the abatement of the entire amount assessed to the trust.
If I may briefly respond.
Yes, please.
2 points. One, Mr. Dorr, I don't think we received the documents that Mr. Kalin was referring to. I don't know whether we were supposed to receive those this afternoon, but we haven't seen those documents. I have no reason to think Mr. Kalin's numbers aren't correct, but that's not a document that the applicant has been shown, and I wasn't sure whether we were supposed to have received it or not.
I did forward it at about 2 o'clock.
The outline, yeah, but not the PDFs that Dave refers to that were apparently backed up or behind it, or I think we got part of it.
Yeah, I'll double check and make sure that you get that, if not after the fact, but.
Thank you. I think the problem, Mr. Kalin, is trying, he's standing on his head trying to explain something that is making it incredibly complicated. I think it is a much simpler. The judge has ruled that a deed is not required. We agree to that. If that's the case, then it is well within your authority to treat this as 2 separate parcels for tax purposes. The one that is occupied by the foundation and used for scientific research and education, and the one that is owned by the Gastons and used for their personal enjoyment. It's just that simple. We don't need to get turned on our head and try and figure out what is it ownership for the Superior Court in Rockland and what is a different form of ownership for purposes of this tax abatement. I think it's really simple. 2/3 of the island is owned by the foundation under the tax laws and is tax exempt. 1/3 of the island is owned by the Gastons and is not tax exempt. And I don't think it needs to be any more complicated than that.
You guys have any other?
I think we have information we need to review this matter and bring it up at a future meeting. Thank you both for your time tonight. Or all
Thank you very
three.
much. Thank you for your time. Thanks for consideration.
Ask Wes a question?
Thank you.
Wes, are you still on there?
I'm just curious, how come the land part, if they have a tax bill for the building, how come they don't have the land part on there? I mean, just because you own 2/3 of something doesn't mean it's definitely 2/3 of the value. I mean, not all properties equal, so that's all. I'm just curious what the 2/3 that they actually own would be assessed at.
Sure. Can follow up with them.
We will go on to the minutes from our two previous meetings versus our July 21st, 2020 meeting. I'll second that motion. Any discussion? All those in favor? And the July 30th law enforcement workshop. I move we accept the minutes. Second by Phil Crossman. All those in favor?
Andy, I don't see an agenda.
Is it in your box still?
Yeah,
Oh.
we'll probably put it in policy.
Okay.
Okay, we'll go on to approve and sign treasurer's warrant number 5. So moved.
Second.
Seconded by Jake Thompson. All those in favor? All right, communications. We have a response from our county commissioner about our portion of county taxes.
Yeah, Sharon, Commissioner Pullman had forwarded to me today a breakdown that the county has of what each town pays in, you see that on the third and fourth pages of what was provided. The first 2 pages is what you'll find, in the budget as they present it every year. But by town, it goes across each department in the percent of the amount of assessment or tax paid to the county by the towns and which department receives how much of that. So the question that was asked at the community forum or meeting last week was how much money of the town's contribution to county taxes is contributed to the sheriff's budget, which is both for patrol and jail services. And for the taxes due this year, $142,844 of what we pay would be going to the sheriff's department. And I think to follow up on that, the question was also asked, couldn't we just use that contribution if we do not engage in a contract with the sheriff and put that towards our own or a different level of service? And the answer to that is no. Other towns, while they wish that were the case, because there are, I think, 3 other towns or 4 other towns that have a higher assessment than we do, and they have their own police departments, and that's something that the state has not found to be available to just subtract that amount, if you will, from your county tax bill and put it towards your own. So unfortunately, that's not something that we can do.
Oh, imagine that.
Yeah, I think, that was the answer.
I
we all
could
did
answer
know.
that question. So that's all she had to say. She didn't have any other, she just sent that along. That was the.
Yeah, she was following up on, I think, on a conversation she had with Pam at the end of the meeting. She wanted to make sure that it was shared with the board.
Yeah, it was before the meeting, which doesn't matter, but I did ask her that question and she did a good job. Thanks to her.
It's close to 400,000 between the jail and the golf, and if you throw the district attorney in, it's definitely over 400,000. Actually, that's where most of our money goes.
Next speakers from the floor? There are several people tuned in remotely. Does anybody have any comments, questions? Okay, hearing none, we'll go on to committee and department reports and appointments. Accept and appropriate donations.
Make a motion to accept the 2 donations and appropriate them as they were supposed to be.
Second.
Seconded by Phil Crossman. All those in favor? Okay, road commissioners reports. This report.
I don't think we have a copy of the on the screen.
Yeah, no, sorry, I just put it in on this today.
Did you get the information about the warranty on the tractor we're talking about?
Yep, yeah, the same warranty was available for that used model as it was for the other one as well, so. And I did circle back with them on getting an estimate on the labor included to get the attachments put on and retrofitted in some cases. And so all of that, including transportation, was in that 94,465 is what it was that was approved. And so signed the purchase order today and sent it in.
Ditching will continue this week. Is that last week's?
Yeah, we're still doing
That was
something.
as of Sunday afternoon, so they're still doing,
Where's next?
I
They were
can't,
still on the Dogtown Road today. They were just coming down the hill by where, like right before you get to the Sands Road, they were just coming down.
Okay.
They were right there.
Okay. Good. I think they're doing a great job.
There's definitely some room for some rain runoff.
Yeah,
And some snow pile.
if it ever does rain. All right, let's go on to old business, our draft harbor ordinance revisions.
Pam had asked that we put this back on. As you recall, we went through late last fall, early winter, some revisions to consider, and then had not had I don't know if we ever had a public hearing on those, or if we did, if there were other changes that came up, but I know we didn't have a special town meeting, certainly at this point. So, with another summer in swing, if there's other things in there that now today that we also want to review prior to a hearing, or if you're comfortable with what was drafted late last fall and want to go forward for a hearing with that once we can get a space to do so.
We did make sure that boat trailers can be,
We need, yeah, it's
Specified.
added, right?
we did add that on.
I believe.
Yeah. I believe we did add that.
Yeah.
We just haven't been able to approve it. By the time we were ready to have a public hearing, public hearings were not an option.
Yeah, it's
Does
under,
anyone else have any other thoughts? I think the ordinance looks quite well.
These two, we're
as
ready all
written.
over again.
it's under section 9 that no trailer shall be left longer than 48 hours in the parking lots / wharves identified herein in section 9. So that includes the ferry wharf, fish plant wharf, and the parking lot wharf.
No, I thought it looked good.
Yeah, okay, so for our next meeting, we'll try to set up a date and time for public hearing.
Yeah, I think it'd be wise. I mean, I don't believe the statutes have been relaxed so that you're, at least I'll have to double check on that. Because we can't gather in this room, obviously, if folks were to attend. And so I'll double check on, in terms of ordinances, if it's allowed to have those virtually, or if we need to seek to have something in a larger venue, or if we need to do it outside again.
Yeah.
Yep, give us some background information. Okay,
Yep, good.
town garage update.
The engineers did come out I believe it was last week on the 23rd, 2 weeks ago. To look at the building and the property that we entered into a purchase and sale agreement for. And so they did provide just today some feedback on that I thought was worth sharing, just so you can see the part, where they are on that. We did have some in the email. It's separate from the status report that we usually get. It did show but they did end up procuring designs, if you will, for the foundation and framing of the building, which was great for them to have access to. They are also working with the low bidder that had submitted, although they were over budget. They're still talking with them about the possibility of working on the existing building and modifying that to meet the needs that we had worked up. And then as far as the salt shed, did provide a quote directly from the company, the manufacturer of the building. And that came back at a significantly lower price. I don't know if you recall, I think it was about $430,000 or $50,000, I believe, in the bids that came in. And the direct quote from the company was for $247,000 installed. So if we buy it directly, there's a considerable savings there.
Wow.
Um,
Oh, good.
So they're recommending we do that and try and do that sooner rather than later, not knowing exactly what the lead time would be to have that manufactured and packaged for delivery. There would be some prep work that would need to happen, obviously, to be able to put that in place. So being able to close on that property, will be another piece to make sure we have happen so that that work can start as soon as possible.
So they say they would anticipate it being constructed adjacent to the existing Mills Garage building. I don't know if it might be a difficult, the site prep there might be more difficult than on the land that we purchased.
Yeah.
Site prep might be what?
Might be more difficult there to build that same salt building there instead of where we, that open space where we did buy last fall.
So there's room, if you're looking at the building to the left, there's room there, and they've got a row of trucks, I believe, parked, and then still room for almost two lanes. And I think they're calling for 40 feet wide. I don't know if they mean in that location to the left of the building or if they mean out in front of it. I assume they mean out to the left, which is
Okay,
not something we talked about at one point. So again, that was after their site review, just some reactions they had.
Okay.
So if, having not seen any significant, do you want to wait for them to kind of come back with presumably to come back with some estimates on finishing the interior and whatever exterior and groundwork might need to happen so that we have a better idea on price, presumably, and before we sign, go forward with the closing?
Yeah.
I presume.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Was the foundation or the pad included in that price? I didn't see it. Is that part of what we'll have for?
We'll have to do that site prep. So it'll need to sit on a pad, so that there is just for the framing and the
Put it out
top.
to bid again for that part, or to hopefully get someone to do it, or what?
Yeah, I think that's all presumably will be part of a more robust report from the engineers at the next meeting.
Okay.
We'll go forward from that, but I'll see if we can get them to give us something a little more concrete on the finished numbers for the next meeting, so we can get that closing going.
Is the purchase and sale, what's the status of the purchase and sale agreement right now? Are there any contingencies that are unfulfilled?
I don't have it in front of me.
We asked that the land be combined, did they allow that?
Right. So I think that we still need to finalize exactly the lines. I mean, I went and looked and explained what we were hoping to be able to get. It is more than the 1 acre than that was presented to us. I think we just need to work it out. I think some of that's in the details of how we finish, with the building design and everything else. So it's signed, just no, it's not completely satisfied yet. So
And the building inspection?
again, you got the initial assessment and review and their thoughts, but there's nothing specific to, they just got the designs. Again, fortunately, they had the designs that were shared with them. So I think they just need to go through all of that still, with engineers and just review that and give us an idea of how it would be modified to meet the needs that we had in the report or in the bid document.
New business. law enforcement, next steps.
I hope we can make some progress on this.
Well,
Like,
perhaps.
So I tried to capture just quickly on the screen for those that are watching, just so they have something to see, just I think what we were hearing in terms of general frustration with the service we had been receiving. And then the things we heard people say they were willing to see or do. And then the next steps is hopefully, again, what we'll talk about today. Any thoughts? Is there information or numbers you'd like to see, scenarios you'd like to see?
I have two thoughts. Number one, I'm really not interested in signing a contract with the sheriff's office if they can't guarantee residency on Vinyl Haven. I don't see the point in signing such a contract
If they can't guarantee what.
if they cannot guarantee residency on Vinyl Haven. I don't see the point in having a contract at all. And I'm remain adamantly opposed to Vinyl Haven forming its own police department.
yeah, I agree with that.
So somewhere in the middle, presumably there's some sort of law enforcement, or I guess that'd be helpful to hear from the board.
I know that.
Those are the extremes. What's in between?
What about, I thought the rotation sounded like
I mean, as long as they're,
seemed to work.
Yeah.
Seemed to work good when they were doing that.
I mean, I don't care if we have the same cop that lives out here for the whole year, but as long as when they're on duty that they stay here those
Right.
days that, I mean, what is the duty hours usually, 10 to 8 or something at night?
They're usually either noon to 10 p.m.
Yes.
or 2 p.m. to midnight.
So, I mean, presumably, if someone was coming out to do that, they wouldn't be able to get back to the mainland those evenings anyway, so, they'd have to have an apartment or at least, at the very least, a hotel room for the nights they're out here. I don't think they'd be more comfortable if they had an apartment or,
Had their own place.
I mean, if they wanna do the rotational thing and they find an apartment that they can all, one person comes for 1 week and the next week, that's fine with me. I mean, I thought Kevin's letter had some good points about, I mean, sometimes when cops out here and lives out here, he gets a little bit too chummy with people and might let them get away with some things, so, I mean, if we sign a contract and, they can put someone out here, those nights that they're working, they can go home after they're, if they wanna go on the first boat and come back on the 10:30 to go home for an hour, that doesn't bother me, but I mean, I don't see how they'd be doing it if they were.
Right.
Yeah, we need to-
That time in the morning from midnight, in the morning when they're off duty is their time, I guess.
Certainly seems that, to have somebody out here overnight, maybe not in residence, but like you say, a rotation, if they're on duty X amount of hours, when they're off duty, they can,
If they get called out, they get overtime. I mean,
Right.
Isn't that how it works anyway?
Yeah, so last year, you might recall, when there was a rotation through the winter, I think it was started in like January or February maybe. There was this agreement that we had reached between the county and us that the $25 a day stipend on the rotating deputy basis was not enough from their side or their perspective. And we had authorized up to $75 a day. So with the stipulation that 25 a day was still the island stipend as the contract and union agreement has, that $25 would go towards the off-duty but available, like your on-call stipend, like first responders get. And then another 25 that they saw as like a detail assignment because they were being told that they had to come out versus it being part of a bid rotation that they put in for. So that's how we saw it breaking down, was in those three different ways. And so, yeah, presumably there'd have to be, I assume that there would be some sort of consideration from their end or expectation anyways from the county side for compensating the on-call. Whether the position is that the compensation is the housing or whether it's something in addition to. I assume that'll be a sticking point. on their end to be available off hours. 'Cause again, the contract we had was for the 40. We mutually agreed on any overtime if it could be filled, but it didn't speak to the, when you're off duty and not currently working for your employer.
Well, if Knox County doesn't want to call them, they can send somebody out to deal with it, I guess. I mean,
Right.
it's their scheduling. I mean, you would think they would want to call the person over here because they wouldn't have to involve Marine Patrol or Coast Guard or anything to get someone out here, but.
And I think they acknowledge that. That's a huge thing that we tried to speak to last year when we talked to the commissioners in the sheriff's office was, you know, it is the first call if there's someone out here because it is so much quicker to respond. And we all acknowledge that. So I think that's helpful in the
That's
sense that
part of
we
where they
both
get-
recognize the benefit of having a contract out here.
Well, that's part of the on-call stipend overnight thing. I mean, if they don't want the extra $50 a night or whatever it is. I mean, I understand sometimes you have something that you might need. I mean, I don't know what would come up, but,
And then whatever might come up in life, yeah.
right, I mean, that you physically couldn't do the call, but, I mean, I would think they would call them first. And also, I like those reports, like the Peaks Island thing, they just said, we got on duty at 8, we went and met the vote, I mean, just kind of summary like of the day, that would be some way to get some account. We had a call, we went to such street, I don't need to know,
Right,
I mean, that was perfect, I thought, I mean, we went to something lane to follow up on a call.
Yeah.
That's all I need to know, that, you know,
I
it
agree.
doesn't need to be minute by minute, there was like 5 things, met a vote, one of them was shovel hydrants and then followed up on calls, I mean, if they could do something like that too, I mean, I think they should be giving us a little bit more. I mean, I don't think that would be that hard to sit down and, I mean, they must keep a log anyway, don't they, for their.
Well, yeah, as long as it's in the computer, you know, they can go back and kind of queue or query the computer for Vinyl Haven specific calls. And you put in the dates that you want and there's
Yeah,
a lot of information you can or don't include as a result. So the reports we get are all kind of generated from that and they pare it down into just a Word document with the number of incidences and the type of incidents.
And that is totally useless.
maybe you could just reference
Makes no
that
sense to me.
Peaks Island thing when you're asking them about kind of what we're expecting. Did you see that, Pam?
Yes, I do.
I thought that was better than what we get now.
We don't even get anything.
Well, we get the list of how many calls for different things, but I thought that was. that
I
would
haven't
be a
even
step
seen
in-
one of those for
We only get those sometimes.
sometimes,
Yeah,
I
right?
think it was,
I thought that we should ask for
What was a
that.
good report? I
Yeah.
wouldn't want there to be any confusion about whether during off hours, they were going to call our resident deputy or send somebody else from Rockland. I wouldn't want there to be any confusion about that. The resident deputy is the person who's gonna respond. The 24-hour coverage that we're looking for.
Right.
so I think the question is, you know, is that something that through a contract with the county or differently, but say it's through the county again, is that something that can be negotiated of one person to be available 24/7 through their union contract and agreement they have? You know, that was to the point that the sheriff was talking about. There's some things that they're restricted to, some things that might be possible. But I think that's when you have the unions involved, it's a whole nother layer that unfortunately we have to play within, even though they're not our employee. So, you know, it was, I think, brought up at that meeting too. I mean, the suggestion of if it needs to be more than one deputy, is that something that we'd presumably want to look at? If they could fill it. And I think what we right now, I've looked at it a little bit, but what we budget for now and the fact that we budget for an extra 10-hour shift every week and the 240 hours in the summertime at time and a half, and we pay 100% of that. We're not too far off from, you know, having another full-time, the appropriation for another full-time 40-hour week deputy. The incentive that a deputy might have seen in the past to have all the overtime hours would certainly go out the window. You know, but would a second deputy with the addition of potentially another housing allowance, you know, and it looked like probably 10 to 15, maybe $20,000 more if there was cost sharing from the county. If we had to pay 100% of the second deputy's 40 hours, it would be different. And I can run numbers like that so you can see what it looks like.
Yeah, I mean, in the summer, it wouldn't hurt to have 2 deputies, I guess. I mean, 2 40-hour shifts.
Right.
I mean, that's still not on call 24 hours a day, but it would be
80 hours out of,
168.
yeah, I mean, that's
It's
pretty.
half of the,
Yeah.
half of the time when someone would be on call, I mean, and presumably it would be, one of them would work from, what? They might overlap, right? Sometime in the middle, one would work from, say, 6 in the morning till, was it 10-hour shifts, or would they do 8-hour shifts? So,
I think it's in their contract. I can't remember if it's in their agreement through the union, if it's for 10-hour shifts or if that can be modified or not. I can't recall.
well, I mean, so 6 to 4, and then the other one might come on and go noon to midnight, so.
Should be a period where there's 2 actually on duty at the same time, yeah.
I mean, and then the other cop would be here, if there was a call, you know, something serious, they could be the backup, I guess.
So another thing just to throw out there is, I've mentioned to a few people just to see what the reaction might be, but, should there be some way to look at the islands? And I mentioned this last year when we met with them, but there's 2 zones in Knox County, right? And so, and there's the island contracts, and we feel like most of the time, if someone isn't filling the hours out on the islands through the contracts, that there is no one else coming anytime soon. So, should there be consideration for an island zone, if you will, and that the line for law enforcement between the thoroughfare and the idea of that's the North Haven deputy, this is the Vinyl Haven deputy, and they don't cross unless they're on an overtime shift or something serious is happening. Could there be consideration for, say, 3 deputies rotating between the 2 islands as an island zone, and that when the cruiser's at the thoroughfare, it might be back in downtown in an hour, that they're just traveling through another town as they would on the mainland. And with 3 deputies, if that was the case, rotating coverage for the 2 islands, is that something that would be more effective or, provide the response or the coverage that we're expecting? Whether we can come up with something, of course, there'd have to be reliable transportation across the thoroughfare, whether it's a county-owned or town-owned boat, a cruiser at the thoroughfare for whoever comes across to be able to go back and forth or come to town. That was one thing that we had thrown out last year when we were meeting with them, just to think about.
Yeah, so then there'd be always someone on call, right? Because they have their 2 zones, and there's always one person in each zone, and then the person ahead of them. So then if there was a 3rd zone, then there'd be, if we could get it, it would be nice.
We do have someone who's raising their hand, if you will. Claudia Dengler.
Go ahead. Claudia.
I was just, seems to me that there is more data that we could look at to help inform a solution. As seasonal patterns and daily patterns and specific nature of the crime patterns might really inform the way we craft a solution. And I would volunteer to help do that and work with the Knox County people and their data collection unit to examine this stuff and then try to bring back something to the Board of Selectmen that would help inform our strategy. It just seems like the criminal justice stuff and law enforcement especially is really when the more precisely you can understand the issues that are going on in your community and craft a targeted solution to that, the better the results are in general. And I think from a little bit that I understand, I'm new here, I'm a year-round resident, but I am very new. But I have a background in this area, and if I can be of any help in trying to understand what's going on and how we can best use our resources to address the issues, I'm happy to do that.
Good idea.
Yeah, thank you very much for that offer. If you'd like to compile data and give us results, we'd be very appreciative.
That's something that I get currently from Knox County. I mean,
Not-
It,
not what we need.
Go ahead, Claudia.
And I
Just-
guess I don't, maybe you already have all this information and I don't. So I hope I'm by suggesting this because it's possible that you already know all this. And
No.
anyway,
No.
I'm happy to offer.
Thank you very much. No, we don't get a ton of data from the sheriff's office. So if you would like to research it and report back to us, we'd be very appreciative.
I probably would have to do this in an official capacity. I mean, generally speaking, these data are held rather closely for various reasons. So I guess I should come and talk to whomever in your office and then Knox County and figure out how I can get access to the best information and bring it back to you.
If you'd like to get in contact with Andy Dorr, our town manager, that'd be a good first step.
Okay, I'll do that.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
So in terms of so the data and seeing what might be there, if there's trends in times of day or types of calls and that kind of stuff, are there things that you want me to look further into in terms of coverage types or follow up with the sheriff on in terms of presumably we want to work towards something sooner rather than later so we have some sort of law enforcement. I
Right.
think Final Haven's just blacked out on the schedule right now for the foreseeable future. So there's no, as we had before, a contract that got us 40 hours a week. There's nothing right now that's proactively putting someone out here at this moment. So if I could follow up, if you want me to follow up with the sheriff
Can we
to,
sign like a 1 month
So we,
thing just until we figure out what we want to do? I mean, we kind of need to do something, don't we? I
We
mean,
have $0.
are we without a sheriff's deputy right now? Do we have any coverage at all?
we have the general coverage afforded to any town in Knox County by the sheriff's office.
So they drive out on the ferry and drive around and leave?
If
They
do
could.
it, though. They
Well, that's what
probably
I'm saying. Is there anybody out here at all?
Not on a schedule as we had before, no.
don't, Unless somebody decides to get on that ferry boat.
Yeah.
Now, the next part is, we at this time have exactly $0 to sign a 1 month contract.
we don't have any leftover that we carry forward.
No, any money unspent in that line will go right to the general reserve. And the taxpayers, the towns who told us, do not spend a single nickel.
Well, we've got to
in
have,
the upcoming
we have to
fiscal-
have some coverage regardless.
No, we don't.
We have to,
We're gonna have to have a special town meeting much sooner rather than later, much sooner rather than later. But before we have this town meeting, us as a board, along with sheriff's office, is going to have to come up with some sort of solution to present to them. If we go back to town meeting and present the exact same thing that we presented a couple weeks ago, I would assume we would vote it down,
right.
as would I.
Is there any way you can get a 6-week thing? Like ask them how much that would cost and then we can ask the town just to go for that while we're negotiating? Or
That's a solution, a very short-term solution.
A 6-week solution?
or 2 months?
Yeah.
2 months.
Or 2 months, yeah.
And then we can go ask the town to give us that X amount of dollars to cover 60 days worth of coverage, and then hopefully by then we'll have payment out of the contract and gotten the rest of the money. I mean, that's pretty much all we can do right now, isn't it? I mean, 'cause it's gonna take us a while to get this contract through, and presumably, I don't know, maybe 90 days. I don't know how long it's gonna take. But
Yeah, and all of it depends on personnel too. I mean, even if you today had an answer for and the money to spend, I mean, you'd have to have the personnel to be able to fill the position too, so.
I'm in favor of that. We do need to have coverage out here. We can't rely on customary municipality coverage that Knox County provides by responding to a call, by coming out here on a boat.
Right.
We need somebody out there, and if it takes a special arrangement for, as Jake said, for a couple of months and then appropriate the money later at a town meeting.
we have to get the appropriation to cover if they're even willing to entertain something like
Well,
so.
it could be contingent upon the money being appropriated later.
Well, it seems a lot of our problem is also the fact that they can't even promise that they can send anybody out here. Now, how helpful is that?
I actually, shortly before town meeting, I had a conversation with Rob Potter in the parking lot. And he told me there was one day, he was the only deputy, excluding the islands, on patrol at that moment. And he had to call in Appleton. And on dispatch, he got a call to go down to Port Clyde, I think. The ride from Appleton to Port Clyde is, going down those back roads is a little bit.
Right.
If you could fly, it'd be quick, but it's a lot of back roads. So yeah, Knox County is dealing with a major hiring problem. They've made us aware of that now for quite some time.
And I don't think it's unique just to Knox County either.
Oh, no, police departments all over the
Right.
country.
Right, but I mean, we're talking about Knox County, so
Yeah,
obviously. Well, I think we need to get the town to,
So would you pursue a temporary solution? Does that require a motion?
I can see if the county funds 50% of our contracted time, right, our 40-hour contract. We provide the other 50%. July 1st was the start of the next 6 months, or 25% of what they already have approved in their spending capacity. So there is, there's money available at the county level, to the point you made, Phil, about, we're seeking funding, we still need to come up with solutions, but presumably we're going to have some sort of law enforcement. And once that, contingent upon that vote for monies, we could then potentially even reimburse that 50% of those months. But as of right now, they'd have to be willing, the county would have to be willing to acknowledge that they've got 3 months of funding from July 1st to fund a 40-hour-a-week coverage.
So we shouldn't need to. We shouldn't need to have a special town meeting to come up with money.
If they're willing to do that. So I think, I can talk with the sheriff and see if that's something that they're able and willing to commit to. I don't know if personnel's there to allow for that or not, but something is better than absolutely nothing.
yeah, we're gonna do something.
Is that a sheriff's decision or a commissioner's?
I believe it's the sheriff's, once the budget's approved, I think the sheriff has a lot of flexibility or leeway to be able to determine where within his budget that's been approved it gets spent. Some stuff might have to run by the commissioners, but I can find out.
That would be easier than us
Yeah.
trying to do a 2-month thing or whatever we were trying to do.
Find out for our next meeting.
And I wouldn't want to wait till the next meeting.
Well,
I wouldn't want to wait till, if he has something to report in a couple of days, I wouldn't want to wait till the next meeting to decide what to do next.
Do you want to see if for the next meeting, have a special meeting to appropriate money for the July to December? We did a 6-month contract last year just to get through to line up with the union agreement in North Haven as well, while we were also waiting to figure stuff out. But do we want to look at doing a 6-month, which includes a retro back to July 1st? We did incur 3 weeks of coverage. It was only because of the governor's executive order that we started the new fiscal year with last year's number, but with a $0 appropriation, we still have to pay that first 3 weeks. So we could potentially, if you want to entertain something like that, just look at 6 months, July 1st to December 31st. While we continue to get this, it gives a little more cushion.
I'm certainly okay with that.
But, it could take us that long to hammer something out and find someone to come out here, so we need to have something, I guess. Yeah,
But in the meantime, you pursue this question with the sheriff about whether 3-month funding. And then if you have information that we can act on earlier, then we should act on that.
I agree.
Earlier
I
than the
don't
next
know.
meeting.
so of our money that we send over for the 40 hours and whatever, the 120, how much of that actually goes to the officer that's coming out here?
Yeah, whatever
They
their
get-
wage
They get a
is,
salary or is it hourly?
it's hourly. All those positions are hourly at the deputy level. So it's anywhere, I think, between like 20 and I want to say the highest deputy was in the range of 31 or 2 an hour or something like that. So the first 40 generally are filled, as straight time. There is occasions where we have slots filled, or when we had the rotation back last winter, there were times where our first 40 were at time and a half, because that was the cost to the county, and that's the way the contract's written, which is presumably something that we did bring up, and presumably something that we want to try and somehow not have to pay time and a half for our first 40.
All right.
But that was the way the contract was worded, that held us to whatever cost incurred by the county to fill it is what we paid.
Okay, so yeah, find out what we can, report back to us.
And so are we gonna have a special town meeting to vote on 6 months worth of budget next time or not?
Well, we'll have to have a selectmen's meeting. To set the warrant.
And it would depend on how.
Yeah. depends
Talk
on
to the
how
sheriff.
these- yeah,
We can always call a meeting.
Right,
If it needs
and that'll
to.
be a very, if that meeting is held before 2 weeks from now, it'll be a very brief meeting, I assure you. If I'm gonna remain as chairman of this board, we're meeting every other day here, it seems.
I know, but we have to get this figured out, so I think as soon as Andy gets the information, if we need to have a meeting, we can call a brief meeting.
Right, a very brief meeting, we can even cancel a future meeting.
We can have a meeting by Zoom if you don't wanna come up here, if it's just gonna be a brief update, then decide a town meeting.
Okay, let's go into Arcadia Alliance for a passenger ambulance vessel.
This is something Phil had forwarded on to the board. He had attended, was it just the one now? I know Martin Grimness has reached out to us in the past, and the EMS department sent in a letter of support behind this concept of a passenger / ambulance boat. It's something that he met with us as an ambulance service probably 4 years ago or so, and pitched the same type of boat, almost identical. So I think a lot of this is because Islesboro is interested in some sort of high-speed passenger service to other places than just Lincolnville. And so Martin sees it as a multi-stage approach. It's a shovel-ready project. There's funding available at the federal level. That might make this possible. And so that the phased approach would be that, the service would be in Islesboro first. A second boat would begin construction. And is it the second boat that would be the all-electric?
But I don't think if you decided it would be all electric or electric diesel.
So that propulsion and that engine system is part of the consideration for clean powering boats. But eventually,
Funding available through grants for that, I'm assuming.
there could be. So eventually, once that second boat was built, it would serve Penobscot Bay, the greater Penobscot Bay, and be available for service to the other islands.
So 15 minutes isn't quick enough to get to the mainland.
What do you mean? Oh, well, I think it's more about going to another location for them as it is anything else. They were looking at going to Belfast. And they've been researching places to land, dock, park, all that
Or
as well.
border Rockland.
Right, they can go outside too.
Okay.
So Phil had relayed that they were looking for input from the board on the perceived likely impact on the island of the first stage of service. Did I capture the first stage? Did I capture the first stage accurately? He said he's looking for feedback from this board on the first stage of that project.
It's not on the first stage, it's just the sense of the board members, a sense of the value of the proposed vote in this community, or negative value, whatever it is.
So
Presumably an ambulance boat would be,
that'd be fantastic. Now, so the next question, if it's an ambulance boat, we'd want it here overnight presumably.
We'd want what?
We'd want it here overnight. That would make it, obviously, it makes more sense.
or at least.
You have to find someplace to put it.
Yeah, the
That's gonna
letter,
be a problem.
the letter we send in for support from the EMS department was for 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. in particular, that having access to an ambulance boat in the evening, through the evening, was the most value to the EMS service,
Absolutely.
because during the daytime, you do have other options.
A lot of other options in the daytime. Nighttime, especially during inclement weather,
Mhm.
eliminates a lot of those options sometimes.
And this is the kind of information they're looking for, this kind of input.
Yeah, so you need someplace to dock it. That's number one. And I suppose there's no way that if it's gonna be such a quick trip, we can limit only islanders to using it. You know, to come back and forth.
Presumably, if they kept it in the thoroughfare in the wintertime, they could use it to shuttle people over that came on the 515 boat. There was another use for it. I mean, if they kept it in the thoroughfare in the winter, when we get, I'm assuming that schedule's not changing anytime soon, so that would be obviously a lot safer than an open skip if they had it up there and they made it run at 6:30 every,
Right,
No,
go back and forth between there. And I mean, there's other uses before that they probably have like that, they probably didn't even think about, they could use something like that, so.
they'll have to go to Dr. Claire, but yeah, I mean, really,
How big?
the
is
only
the
thing
boat
I'm
you're
really
talking
thinking
about?
of is,
I think
Yeah.
it's like, was it 60 feet or 100 feet or somewhere?
Now, they were talking, when I was on, they were talking about 60 feet or so.
So if it's at the thoroughfare, we got some
Yeah.
significant improvements to make if it's gonna be shoreside on our side.
since we don't own the land anyway.
I did mention that to Martin, you know, 'cause I think part of it is is it University of Maine that they have some folks,
That's
some
all there.
professors at the university looking at the economics of it and modeling the financial piece. But the vision is that the DOT or the ferry service would be the operators or keepers of the boat. So there's certainly a lot to figure out still through all of this, and
In theory, I think it sounds like an excellent idea.
But there's a lot of.
There's gonna be a lot of,
Hmm?
you know, there's gonna be a lot of boxes.
Well,
And I-
just
and- And to your point, Phil, you know, if you'd like to be on that committee, I'm all for it, especially because you're our ferry advisory member. Unless anyone has any objections. Pam looks like she might want to be on the committee.
I think Philip is the perfect choice.
Well, over the next couple of weeks, you know, if other things occur to us,
Yeah.
that we,
Right.
negatives or positives, either one, make sure that,
I mean, if there was a boat that you could get on for the same or similar cost as a passenger ferry ticket, and you could leave here at 6 o'clock in the morning and you could be in Rockland at 6:30, I mean, in the
Yeah.
summertime. Or, you know, if it was at half the trip, I'm sure people would
You
take.
know, there's all sorts of, yeah. Or if they could run a later evening trip, so you could go over for supper. And, you know, come back the same night, there you go.
But I mean, the ambulance thing is the big part because they
Well,
wouldn't have to cancel any ferries anymore.
Yeah, no, I think that is the most important part, that it would be, could serve as an ambulance ferry.
Right,
and
well, yeah.
the kinds of advantages that were suggested at that last meeting by some other island representatives were really, I thought, kind of far-fetched, and they included increased property values and as a result, increased sources of income for infrastructure. It didn't register with me. I didn't sense that kind of benefit myself, but there was no question some did.
I don't think it'll hurt any of those things, and it's something.
If the
that
boat
we
left
can
here
market
at 6 o'clock in the
Right.
morning and got to Portland at 7:30 in the morning, so people could go down there where there's a lot more jobs, and I can see the property values going up, but, you know, other than that, I don't. I mean, people can go on the first boat to get to work in Rockland by 9 now, so.
Right.
It'll be interesting to see
Yeah.
how it proceeds.
Yeah. Final Haven Runway.
so just need to schedule the surveyor to come out. The extension for 300 feet, Randy Farnham had still is offering to truck the material and use his excavator to place material on that far end. In terms of design, presumably if it's locally funded, I don't know yet still we have to come up with some sort of design estimate for cost, because it's not just going to be the cost to move that material. I mean, that material we have at the shooting range, I think is what he was referring to when he said he'd truck it for us. In its current state, it's just deep fill. It's going to need to be screened at the very least, or certainly have a good layer on top for the surface. So there's going to be some cost presumably to all of this, and some design consideration, which some of it's pretty common sense, but it's funded locally. We can avoid perhaps the need for engineers, which certainly drive costs up on things. So I don't know if you want to form some sort of committee to help go forward with that design stuff. You'll see there's also considerations to from PIA for additional things that may or may not warrant someone helping review some of that stuff. There might be some consultants or some professionals on the island that are here seasonally that might be willing to help with design stuff as well. So if that's something that you want, we're gonna have something to go by when we start eventually adding to it. So those are, how
What
would you
about
like me?
the title concerns we have to begin with? Where do we stand with those?
As I mentioned, we're still just need to schedule to get the surveyor out here. I did look at the old minutes and it didn't specify a particular surveying company to use. So I mentioned I had reached out to the gentleman who surveyed the property we bought at the pit last year. There's another person just to try and see if we could get ballpark ideas and price if they were different. As you mentioned, as you might recall, Kevin had a rough estimate, I think between I thought it was between 7,000 and 10,000 at one point that he had gotten. It was just too hard to say for certain until they got out here what it would actually be. And we've authorized up to 7. So hopefully it can be done for that or less.
And we were hoping that they might offer to fly the person out here to decrease some of the cost of them riding the ferry.
Right.
We'd asked that they consider it.
So what does the timing look like?
Hopefully within the next couple of months, it can be wrapped up. The survey can be wrapped up, but all depends on schedule and weather and getting out here.
So we have to have the survey first before we can do the.
I would recommend it unless you want to steer away from it. I mean, based on what Dell had mentioned years ago, is that some of those back lot lines that go to the end of the runway, some of them don't have pins necessarily. And so it's all, I think if you're going to extend 300 feet, you're going to want to know for certain whose land you might be crossing, because that might not be okay. Whether it's a taking or a voluntary donation or something in between. I would highly recommend that.
How much of the land, we don't own any of it?
How far past the current runway until we
Right. That's
right?
That's it.
What
That's
you
the
said,
question.
You step off the runway.
So we don't know
That's
how
the
many
question.
feet past. Yeah, so
I mean,
guess
we've got plenty of plots and things that, Dell had drafted in relation to the overlay zone, so we can kind of see where the overlay zone is. Some of them don't necessarily delineate perfectly the runway.
Yeah, so we gotta get the survey done. We can't just.
No, I'd recommend it.
Yeah, oh yeah, we have to know.
I thought that the whole question was in the other, I thought that the zone A overlay was, there wasn't a question and it was the zone B, like declare the trees for more, not necessarily like where you can't build, I thought.
So
I
zone.
just had it wrong in my head.
Yeah, zone A is the runway itself, and very shortly after that, what would be the approach. And zone B is more of that feathered approach, if you will. It has to stay clear of no trees, and structures can be, I think, somewhere within B, but no higher than a certain height, and not cause any visual distractions, all that kind of stuff. So,
And I thought that's where the question was, what part of B was that we were gonna do. So.
Right.
But we'll find, the surveyor will answer all those questions.
So tell me again where we stand with securing the services of the surveyor.
just need to finalize and get their schedule to come out here.
Have we contacted them? Are we waiting for a return phone call? Where are we?
They're waiting for me to gather everything that we do have, so they have a starting point, more than just, they can start pulling deeds, but the more we can provide them to start.
What
easier to be.
what is it you can provide other than deed?
As I mentioned, we have a stack of folders right there pertaining to the airport property. So in that, there are some places they can start from in terms of plots and maps that Dell has created, in which there are some pins around and near the property that they can start from or find, hopefully, which would only make for quicker time, hopefully, in that whole process.
So try and schedule that, hopefully
Hopefully, they can start it by the end of the
summer.
month.
Yeah,
Best case scenario.
that's what I was hoping, August or at least middle of September.
Okay.
As I might have mentioned the agreement we had with WAM, which is the Waters Aeronautics in Maine. That It's a multi-year agreement that we have with them that outlines things like liability and maintenance and a few other things that ran out in December. So with that, the group I met with last week from PIA, which was Terry, Ken, and Brud, they're all involved in the management team now, or have been, but are the management team, and that outlined some things for consideration, both in the contract, which I believe I provided you a drafted changed contract for tonight, as well as a few other things to consider. I don't know if you had a chance to read that email from yesterday.
There's a lot to consider.
There was a lot to consider. The first thing that was brought up was there's a significant increase in freight and packages. And at times they aren't, it's more either more economical or it's required that they bring them out on the boat. And when they do, especially if the planes aren't flying that day, one van is not enough for them to get everything that has to be delivered. And they have the standing priority leaving Rockland on the 7th. So they're asking for, is it possible to have a second priority either on the 7 or at a different boat later in that day?
Well, I don't see why they couldn't use the UPS one if they're doing the UPS packages. How is that such an issue?
I don't know that that one should be. It's not a rule. It's an exception in which UPS uses them to deliver. I assume if Patrick's on vacation or something, that sometimes they might do that. So I'm hopeful that that one might be easy. It might just be a communication to Mark in the direction to the terminal.
That the UPS could just call down there and say, our driver's sick today. All Scott Island Air is using it so they can deliver our packages. I would think that would be pretty simple.
Right.
But I didn't know they had a priority in the first place. They've always got a van in the line over there that they move up. What's the difference in missing something?
I'm not sure.
Probably the van is for the second one they usually send out.
It could be. I don't know. So that's one thing that they're asking. It would be just a 19-foot, van. I assume very similar to the one they have now.
Well, especially right now where so many people are getting packages, I would think that at least until the end of the, pandemic or whatever, that hopefully the ferry can work with them for some kind of an extra reservation. I mean, the 845 boat has reservations, right?
No.
It does.
Oh, it does?
Leaving
Yeah.
Rockland, it
Oh,
does.
from Rockland, right.
So they're just asking to get them out here. They're not asking about getting them off here, are they?
Presumably, that would also be, it's not necessarily specified in here, but I can clarify. I presume that they would want to know when they're getting it, one of the two vans off. Otherwise, you got too many over here at some point. Certain times of the year it won't be a problem, but this time of year it may.
So what is that something we have to ask the state about?
So yeah, the priority in the tariff, the priorities are something that never gotten a clear answer on this, but I'm under the impression the legislature has to authorize changes to the tariff. Is that not true, or do you think that's true?
I don't know.
It's always kind of been one, it's never been in one straight answer when we've asked over the years. If nothing else, it starts with a request, usually to the local tariff committee, in which they refer it to you, and then you refer it to the advisory board, and then they pass it upwards from there. I don't get the impression that the manager has sole discretion, but if that would certainly make it easier if that were the case.
Well, I mean, I think we should help them out if they need an extra priority. We should definitely try and get it for them. I mean, maybe not 2 on the 7 o'clock boat, but maybe 1 on the 7 and 1 on the 845 or something. I mean, because some days on the 7 o'clock boat, if you had 2 vans and a trash truck, I mean, that's gonna take up quite a lot of this middle space for any other kind of, construction that might need to be completed. That's just a thought.
The second thing they mentioned was some of that routine maintenance, if you will, of the general property, as well as the insurance for the airstrip. We do have general property insurance for the property, and we did a few years ago start having to pay for the airport liability, if you will. It's a very minimal fee for us, so I have to clarify the additional insurance piece that they mean, but the maintenance is fairly straightforward, whether it's mowing or maintenance of the runway lights, maintenance of the surface of the runway,
Do we already do that?
all of that, with the exception of plowing or something significant, has been done by Kevin for the company, in which he, I think, generally bartered services with people. Just rough estimate, they're guessing, looking back, best they can guess is somewhere between, probably 7,000 and 10,000 a year in total. Some of those routine maintenance costs that he absorbed, as it has in the agreement we have. The next thing was the capital improvements that they envision, the runway extension, as we're still working. The vision Kevin had was for some sort of building larger than what I call a doghouse, I guess, that's there now that packages can be in. He saw the need for something like a 10 by 20 shed that would be able to, when they come in, drop packages into, the possibility someday in the future, if they needed to modify their operation, they could have a staff person in that, those kinds of things. So that was something that he had been talking about wanting to try and do. And of course, in his fashion, he was trying to find a way to make it work on his own, and just needed help with the permitting process to figure that out. So that's another request. A covered area, waiting area for loading and unloading of freight and passengers is something that they're envisioning as being helpful or useful to them on our property. Just something simple, a carport or something like that. They were thinking or had in mind.
Why would we give something over here they don't have for themselves on the other side? They don't have a covered area to do stuff over there.
We have the office spaces.
Huh?
You can go in the office.
But not to load and unload the plane, is that what they're talking about?
They got, I don't know, 3 or 4 buildings there that they load packages in and out of, I think.
Yeah.
There's the office, and there was the office Kevin used, and I think there was at least one other, or it could just stay in the vehicles.
Some sort of lean-to for packages, pretty, with a tarp, that's a pretty simple, as far as, passenger waiting area, that's why it's pushing, that people can sit in their cars and wait.
Right, no, I don't think we need anything like that.
You can drive right to the edge of the runway.
A little terminal building when you get coffee.
Souvenirs.
A bar,
Souvenirs.
They mentioned that they currently maintain several vehicles to move freight around the island, and any ideas that could help reduce those costs would help. Some of the thoughts they had included municipally owned and maintained delivery vehicles, which could be electric, funded by the municipality. A secure central drop-off building that island residents could come and pick up their freight, could eliminate delivery vehicles if our freight contracts would allow. In a municipal funded freight delivery function to take freight centrally delivered by PIA and distributed on the island. Those are just some of the ideas they had. I did have a follow-up question to them as to a couple of them on that. One was whether the contracts, as they said, that they'd have to look and see, would the contracts allow for a general pickup, and they weren't sure. And if they do, does it have to be staffed? Not, only in the sense of trying to understand, is that something that they would be staffing if so, and if not, would that be expected?
You can't have packages for people to go pick up, I mean, that's.
Yeah, I'll go pick up your packages, Jay. I know there's something great coming.
Just-
I thought that the FedEx, why do they,
The FedEx picks up right from there.
they're just thinking down the road in general, this is just,
We'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
Yeah, but it'd be nice to think about it before we cross the
Right.
bridge.
they had a lot of thoughts and concerns and questions and ideas, and I said, well, just put them all out there and we'll talk about them, and some of it's through the agreement, some of it's outside the agreement, and, but the starting point, for discussion at least.
Had Kevin ever brought up many of these? I know you said something about the building and the runway extension.
Beyond that, I don't think any of these, the maintenance, the building and the runway are the only things I'd recall talking with them about.
He was hoping we'd take over maintenance, or they
Well, I think I might have suggested in some ways, only because he's talked about how much it costs him to maintain our property. You know, and some of the things like when it had to repair the runway lights, probably because they got caught up in a plow or something, he foot the bill for it. You know, so there's some things in there that it's our property at the end of the day, whether it's that company or another company. That ultimately is our property. And right now they're the sole users of it, which is probably why the agreement had them doing it. So it's just,
Is that something that we mow?
you know, I think Randy usually does it, and they usually, as he did, worked out some sort of, again, barter for service.
Well, presumably that's something we could ask David to do on the next contract.
Yeah.
Once every couple.
Or if he can't do it, someone else, yeah. The maintenance of the runway is, well, it's a fair point.
Right.
It is a fair concession. I'd rather see them just increase cost of services, but continue to cover it. But if it does come down to the town paying for it, then so be it. Right now, it's pretty cheap to fly from here to there.
I think a lot of that routine stuff is, you know, would be fairly minimal on us because we have the grader. I mean, the stone dust doesn't cost a whole lot. It's a truck trip over there to go get it.
Right.
You know, the mowing's probably one of the bigger ones, and if the electrical needs to be done with the runway lights, if something happens to them, you know, that may be something.
That might be a problem.
But that doesn't happen very often,
No.
from what I understand.
No, those lights burn for a long time and it's all,
The other thing, next thing that they mentioned was an annual service stipend paid to them. I think some of that gets to they'd mentioned debts and the way that the business had been run and the way Kevin selflessly chose to run the business on behalf of the islands and providing service. And so that was something that they're trying to come up with plans and ways to come out of that hole. And so they're proposing the idea of an annual service stipend, and, you know, whether it be a straight amount or whether it be something I mentioned that right now, the only thing that comes close to this is the nonprofits, not that they're a nonprofit, but that we do get nonprofit requests from certain organizations, and it's usually done by a population or a percent of the value in which the service is provided to island residents the year before. You know, so they said either as a straight amount or as a, you know, some sort of stipend as a per passenger or per pound of freight, or even as an air ambulance or emergency service per person moved. So something along those lines, they said that they see that would be a big help for them. I asked if it would be seen as an indefinite stipend, and they just said that they anticipate it as an annual amount. And if they foresee the service stipend increasing over time, and you know, just right now, they certainly couldn't say yes or no.
Do you have any idea what kind of dollars they're talking about?
They put a number in there, you know, asking if there was consideration for between 100 and 200,000 a year.
We can't give private companies that, can we? I mean,
I think it. I mean, so I mean, the biggest.
my business could use a stipend too.
Right. So the biggest
You're
benefit.
eligible right now, Jake.
The biggest benefit that service provides from the town government perspective, the quickest thing I could think of is the EMS and transporting patients. And they transport about 100 patients a year for us, not counting what the medical center might send over, you know, directly to a hospital without the ambulance. So that was one of my concerns, just thinking since I got this was, well, how does that look if we don't have that service potentially? And how do we transport those 100 people? Some of which could certainly go by life flight, some of which would certainly have to go by ferry boat during the day. But you look at the ferry boat during the daytime, and it's at minimum, you know, probably a 3.5 hour commitment if the boat waits. If the boat doesn't wait, you're looking at upwards of 7 hours, and how hard it is to get volunteers. So that's just one of the perspectives I was thinking out loud. And how do we?
also, what do they charge for a emergency?
I can't remember.
It's
What it
seven-
is.
$650?
It was
700.
I think it was just I think it was.
Oh, it's gone up to 700.
I think they're for emergency flights. I think they charge us 700.
Well, I mean, so
750,
it's not, it's, you know, it's very nice service. It's fantastic that we have that service, but It's
That's
also
pretty
not
close.
charity, it's also not
Seven-
charity.
No,
700 times 100 is 70,000.
Right.
It's not charity either, and so.
Would you say, Eric?
I'd say, you know, the fact that they charge that higher amount for emergency services, you know, it's very important for this community, but it's also not a charity on their part.
Yeah, presumably any appropriation to any requesting entity, like the nonprofits, again, I'll use as an example for donations, they're providing services to the community. You know, I think you'd have to, even if this were to be considered, narrowly consider it in terms of public benefit. Just like when the runway was acquired by the town, the public benefit was for the sole, the sole purpose of being able to transport people, but, for the ambulance services off island. That was a huge, only based on old meeting minutes and letters,
Right.
does that suggest that that's the reason the eminent domain was flexed to be able to require that? So I think you'd have to, if you were to consider it, would have to be narrowly probably viewed in that EMS service. Otherwise, you can't spend, public monies on private.
I gotta think about this. This is very,
I would also, Kevin never did secure funding for that extension, but, originally the idea was, if we would pitch in for help surveying the property, which we were in agreement with, he could come up with funding through grants, I believe even.
Well, he was hopeful that he might find grants. I think a lot of it, as it usually does, is through bartered services where he can.
Well, I mean, barter services to extend the runway, that'd be an awful lot, that would be a lot of barter
It
services.
would be.
We're talking tens of, I don't know if it might be maybe over $100,000.
Well, we were gonna give him the base materials.
We talked about the material at the shooting range,
Which is
transfer
so what
station.
was the estimate for the cost of the extension? There's
We
no,
don't have one at this point in time.
Yeah.
There's a lot of trees you have to not just cut down, but clear, site, level off land.
right,
I mean,
I don't
without,
know if there's a swamp, I don't know where a swamp starts in there.
just looking at, I tried to estimate just what I know for cost for material and just look at the distance and guessing how deep of a base it needs to be. Tried to guess how much it might cost, and I had anywhere between 50 and 70,000 before there was any consideration for donating them. Like, if there's a significant amount of material we could put towards it that we already have, trying to cut down on that. And if some people were willing to donate their services to do certain parts of it, so without trying to take that out of it, I was estimating between 50 and 70 grand to get the survey, any legal fees that might be incurred for potential property issues, all of that.
does the FAA have any jurisdiction over small town?
In what sense? Yes. but
Well,
in
I
what
mean,
sense?
if they deemed it to be unsafe, would there be some way we could get money?
We've gotten it in the past, I think, through federal funds when I think it had gotten some significant surface work in the mid 2000s, I believe.
Why don't we
And-
explore that?
I think there are also funds available. Dan Cross was talking last year about funds that were available specifically for making improvements to Owl's Head, and Kevin had suggested that Vinyl Havens Airport might be considered an extension of that operation and be thus eligible.
I think that's worth pursuing because Knox County did receive a substantial sum of money through that CARES Act funds. And I know that there are some things that they've already slated to have done at that regional airport, because that's the receiving airport. Whether conversations could be had for moving some of that to island runway maintenance, acknowledging that some of those numbers and emplanements is only because of the islands.
There's 10,000 flights out of those 15,000 after the island. So.
Right.
Let's do that too, by all means.
Yeah. We need to put some funding there.
And again, I believe I gave you a draft change of the agreement, the most recent agreement for that. Yeah, so they did have a number of things that they proposed changing in the agreement, so I just went through, and all those draft changes are only reflective of things that they were hoping for consideration, and not my thoughts in response to any of it. So if you want to be able to review that.
Oh, that was their suggestion.
If you want to review that for the next meeting, there is, the insurance thing is something I do want to look into and see. I'm trying to understand what additional, because the insurance listed in here is actually the same name that we currently have. Let's try to see it quick. The indemnifications, if we end up being the primary insurer, we would be indemnifying them. So I just need to have, presumably I'll share it with our risk management folks and have them review it, just to make sure things are okay there. The other one
You
that,
have our lawyer look this over when you crossed off the things before.
no, I did not have them look over before I did it to draft this. Again, these are all just based on what they want. So if you want me to have, I'll start with MMA to see if they
Just
have
make sure that,
anything that jumps out at them as a concern from a liability or legal perspective. The insurance company can look at it from a liability perspective. They'll likely suggest that we have our attorneys review it, if that's something you want. The other thing that jumped out at me was not that there's any reason to think that the agreement would be terminated wrongfully, but there's a clause in there about on 17 that was they recommended, or they asked that it completely be stricken from the agreement. I think I provided the response in the email or in the memo that I amended. No, just removing the town incentive to abide by the contract. It doesn't seem equitable if a wrongful termination takes place, that it should be rewarded with such insignificant consequences. So that's the only other thing that I think is, a big one that jumped out at me. Again, no reason to think that there'd ever be a need for wrongfully terminating it. I think it's either a
no,
60.
but I mean, so the most we'd ever have to pay out if we did wrongfully terminate would be $12 a year.
Under the current agreement,
Right.
yeah. So lots to consider. You want to take some time to think about that before the next regular meeting?
Yeah.
I mean, presumably, out of their contracts with
No.
UPS work, that's still in here, right? They have to keep delivering the mail to keep this contract. Isn't that in here? I read that. And then,
I mean, they have contracts for freight and certain mail, yeah.
Yeah, they have a major contract with US.
right, but that's like
That's what keeps them afloat. I would.
well, that's like part of the leases, like they have to keep that up. So, I mean, what happens if they have FedEx and not UPS?
I don't know, that's all terms that they have. I don't know the specifics of their contracts or how that.
No, but I mean with us, I mean, if they lose the UPS and they still have FedEx, then, I mean, it's gonna be a headache for
You mean
us.
USPS?
Yeah,
Oh, gotcha. I don't know.
mail, sorry.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
All right. Just wanted to report to town manager.
Just quickly, there were 3 things that were brought up this week or the last 2 weeks that I thought I'd just single out. Someone did send an email. I think I mentioned it to Pam about the safety. It comes up every year. The safety concern at the quarry, specifically Lawson's Quarry, where kids jump, and adults run from across the road from Jones's property and into there. So it's a dangerous curve through there. I think the speed limit signs that were up are not surprisingly gone. And the suggestion was painting a crosswalk from the parking lot we created last year near the Fairpoint building all the way over to the existing parking lot. That whole strip of road be painted as a crosswalk just to get people to slow down. I think I politely said that that's not something that we'd likely be able to do on a state aid road.
I thought wasn't there somebody painted a crosswalk from the parking lot by the little quarry across?
From the dog pond. to
Yeah,
the
there used
jumping
to be
spot.
one there.
They had, the state, when they paved last year, wouldn't sign off on a crosswalk there
Right.
because unless we make significant improvements, so it
Yeah.
meets ADA compliance.
Just a big curve there on the.
Well, one thing I did notice, there are no signs on the north end approach to the quarry,
Mhm.
on the North Haven Road. there's one falling over sign on the, by the, telephone
You
building.
mean speed limit signs?
No, just a children playing, slow down sign for that. That one's falling over and it's faded out, so you can't really, it's really not much good. Can we have slow in the middle of the road painted?
We could. I know one thing, so I reached out to the DOT, the traffic guy that came out and reviewed the speed limits with us last year or 2 years ago. Try to pick his brain for, what is it we could do? I mean, obviously there's things that are as aggressive as speed bumps, like you see in the Rockland terminal apparently. There's things that are much smaller profile. You like approach a terminal, like a toll booth that are just like those low profile strips that just get your attention. I was trying to think, is there a way for us to get something like that down as you're approaching
like a
that?
rumble strip?
So I mean, there are solutions there. I mean, they aren't terribly expensive. I mean, you're probably talking, I think it was between 2,000 and 5,000, depending on type you get, to put out temporarily.
Let's just dump a bunch of rocks in the quarry there so no one can jump in. and fall
Well,
off the road.
actually, I haven't seen a lot of kids running across the street.
I've never seen a
But-
child running.
Oh, they do.
But the thing is, I'm sure some of them do, but when I've been up there, I haven't seen the kids doing that. They're just walking along the side of the road, or if they don't swim. But it doesn't matter. People do not go by there going 25. And there are little kids everywhere, and it doesn't matter. It's not safe for the kids that are playing. And people should just slow down. Why do you have to go by there going 35 or 40 miles an hour? It's ridiculous.
So here it goes by there, like, really.
And everybody knows that kids are there swimming, and parents are taking their little kids across the road to the parking lot to get in their vehicles. There's just no excuse for it.
So we could certainly look at getting painted. If we have the stencils for it, we could do it ourselves, the slow in the road. As far as,
What are we allowed to do? Did the guy say we could do speed bumps and all that? We don't need their permission. We can do whatever we want.
as long as we properly post and give notice that there's a bump ahead. I mean, you want to provide people that notice, especially coming around that curve from the north side.
Speed.
No, I was
Yeah.
just curious what we could do.
Yeah, no, that's allowed, certainly.
Well, it's dangerous anyway. The quarries are dangerous, no matter how you look at it. We grew up with them, we live with them, we don't think about it. I mean, yesterday there was an incident where a little kid jumped and a bigger kid jumped on top of him. It was chaos.
Yeah, I would assume that's a little bit different than the concern of the people in the roadway, because now you've got slightly different. I mean, I hear about it from truck drivers, the few that are out here with loaded trucks and the amount of time it takes to stop a loaded truck.
Right.
Even at 25 miles an hour, it could catch you.
Do we need to have a conversation with the school board about not teaching children to play on the road?
Well, that was,
So what are they talking about? Like people running across the road to jump off the cliff? Like
I haven't
5, 10
seen kids doing
teenagers
that.
that do that?
But even if they're not doing that, they cross the street to get to their cars.
Exactly what it said.
People should be driving slow, there for all kinds of good reasons.
they do it. I've been the one that's had to come to a complete stop this summer. I mean, others do, and that's why I get the emails and the phone calls.
That's why I still, we get the telephone off, I don't just start to slow down. And in fact, somebody else was driving my truck on Saturday afternoon. I gave them warning. You need to slow down because you're coming up on some kids, most likely.
Well, definitely the signage needs to be improved.
Well, if it could stay up, that would be a big help, because a lot of our signs do go missing, but we can continue to put them
Well,
up.
yeah, I mean, the speed
Yeah, we
limit
gotta
signs,
continue to put them up. that's
Well,
all.
yeah.
They're
they're probably in the bottom of the quarry.
Oh, you know what? Actually, Andy Farnham told me that, speaking of that spot to jump off on the side of the road, that's where we can find most of the signs, according to him.
Oh, there's a
Awesome.
washing machine in there too.
in Lawson's Quarry.
Yes.
Yeah, apparently they're not too far.
Yeah, we need to get that stuff.
And if there's a washing machine, then you have, that's a major.
Somebody hit it
That's
today.
been in there for 100 years, hasn't it?
I don't know. I didn't know it till we,
100 years ago, washing machine, 100 years ago.
Well, not 100 years, but since I was a kid. it's been in there.
but anyway, so,
100 years ago.
get that stuff out of there. I don't know what,
Time and money.
you got, yeah,
The sign there, let's just make sure we have.
Well, yeah, right off the bat, I just think, you know, there's a 25-mile.
How do those
sign,
rumble
slow.
strip things work? You just put them on the road and take them up, because
Yeah, you
they
could,
get still up plowing.
it's, depending on the type of traffic and the weight of the vehicles or the frequency of traffic passing. I mean, you might be able to find some that can lay down. They might have to go and readjust them, you know, but you can certainly get some that anchor into the pavement. And you do that just outside of the plowing season.
Speaking of something that can easily be stolen if it's not anchored down, then it would get stolen.
Well, I mean, I would rather see a rumble strip than a speed bump, but we have to put something there.
You know, speed bumps and just stuff.
Yeah, there were some that were
There's
an
something
inch
that-
or smaller. I mean, an inch might be still a little high, but there were some, then a lot of the speed bumps are usually between 2.5 and 4 inches. Whereas those rumble strips, if you can, you know, get the fold out ones and once you piece together, you know, they're between, I think the smallest one I found was like a 1/2 inch.
And how much are they?
The 1/2 inch ones that I found were upwards of, if you do it the way it's suggested and have 3 in succession, you know, coming from the north side and then from the south side, you know, those ones in particular, I think were almost $5,000.
whoa,
The other ones that are
Okay, never
just over an inch, they're long, they're wider, so you don't use many pieces. I think they're like 9 feet wide, so I think you just get 3 of them, or 6 of them in total. And I think those ones were like 2,500 or so to get that set. But they are a little, you know, twice as high.
We'll try the signage first.
Yeah. After all, we're coming to an end quite shortly. Anyway, swimming season. Snow will be falling shortly.
well, I think, and if we could paint slow in the road on either side, that would be good.
Mhm.
And the signage. See about a
What
rumble
about, I
strip,
mean, I guess it would probably just keep going.
rumble strip maybe for next year.
All right. In Carver's Cemetery, just here, the entrance to the top of the hill off our parking lot, there was some significant brush clearing the other day. And a request for apparently there was a pile of dirt, probably a yard or a little more, maybe a couple yards of dirt that was in there that presumably was used at one point with the intent of filling graves if need be. And there's been a request for, now that it's cut down, to be potentially maintained as a cleared opening in the request, or I guess offer to buy the pile of material that's there. I didn't feel that I should be the one deciding it. They did cut beyond the property they own and in ours. Haven't had a chance to bring it to the cemetery committee yet. Any concerns or
They can't-
reservations on any of that?
What did
They want to buy, after they cleared the property,
They want to buy
So-
the
then
dirt.
they want to buy the dirt
Yeah.
after they.
So it went probably 10 or 15 feet beyond the pins that are, you can see the pins into the cemetery plot. And so I said, I don't know of any plans or visions to necessarily maintain it as open grass. You know, presumably if the brush is going to grow there, it kind of creates the perimeter around the cemetery. I don't know if that was the plan or the intent, or if there was any thought to it, but that's just a request that we've received that I didn't think I
What an
alone should.
odd thing.
Yeah.
Run it through the cemetery committee. I don't think we should.
The signs, I've had some folks inquire about the signs at the bandstand and whether those will continue to stay up or whether those should come down at this point on town property, and political statements, probably not something that generally, or should be the rule. You know, there's a lot of feeling and a lot of feelings in the month leading up to this meeting, but so I think it's just the concern was the political statement and the signs that are up there. Is that something that the town's allowing to be used in that way? And the request to have those removed at this point. So thought I'd bring that here.
They'll be gone tonight.
I mean, I don't, I mean,
The wind.
Oh, it could
I
be.
mean, how do you really stop it without, I mean,
Yeah.
if someone goes and puts something up, you just have to take it down the next
Right.
day, is that what people
Yeah.
want? I mean, we can't, I mean, if we make it, I mean, obviously, it's a rule that you can't have political statements on public property, right? You know?
Well, certainly not without the permission of the property owners, which would in this case be the board, barring any ordinance or something else that says otherwise.
I'll volunteer to talk to the people who are responsible, if we just can't get it taken back.
Okay.
Yeah, try not to make this a dramatic affair.
Right.
Not really hurting anything.
Mentioned the backhoe, sent that in for purchase today. Did submit another small grant for COVID resources from the state. I put in the request this time. The bigger part of the request was for like an event tent, so that we could actually have an outdoor meeting space while it's warm enough. We can't obviously have people in here beyond the board, so that's something that the new principal said could be up at the school. There's parking up there, there's power, there's Wi-Fi. We could still, if we want to stream the meetings, we could do that while people gathered under the tent. So I'd see if we get it. If we don't, we don't. But if we do, then we could have people show up in person again. Gabe was working on a Maine Community Foundation grant to support more of the broadband work, getting through this business modeling phase and into the next phase of more information. The restroom downtown is open. Gabe has offered to clean that until we can find someone else. And still need to finalize guidelines. At the last meeting, we talked about town committees working on behalf of the board, to carry out some of this work, to be able to meet in this space, but I haven't finalized the guidelines and how to help the resources that they would need to be able to use this equipment and all of that kind of stuff yet. So still need to finish that.
Okay, board members.
I got a few things. Lakeview, that was on last year's work plan. Where is it on the work plan now?
I can ask. I'm not familiar enough with all the ditching priorities that they have at the moment. If I can find out.
Okay, so we'll look for an answer to that. And then the Galamander, I want to make sure that we don't leave that again for another year. Can we follow up on Molly's suggestion for stage 2?
What's that, the crushed rock?
Yeah, the elevated and crushed rock and a couple other things.
That included the enclosure, right?
Is that gonna be
No.
shrink wrapped or something for the winter months, or?
That was a different issue, but that was an issue, yeah. It was supposed to be, she suggested it be shrink wrapped this last winter. We want to make sure it's shrink wrapped this winter.
Right,
Start
But
now.
before that, there was a stage 2 in the restoration work, which included the elevated gravel. And then the fire hall painting?
Yep.
What's going on with that?
Haven't since our town meeting, in which we carried those funds, haven't reached out to anybody yet.
Wasn't Noah gonna do it? Did he agree to do it?
He was going to and wasn't able to do it this spring, and I haven't talked to him since. He said he wouldn't be able to get to a lot of his jobs this spring and probably summer. I think he had someone in his crew pass. That got him, they were behind on some of the work. So when I called him last time in the springtime, he said he wouldn't be able to guarantee that he could do it and might find someone else. So,
Well, let's find somebody else then.
great.
Anything else?
I just think the sidewalks, I'm not going to the sidewalks, but the grass and bushes, I mean, some of them are almost impassable. Could the guys, town crew go and, somebody go and weed whack them, or?
What are we talking about?
Well, specifically, down here from Bickford's to the bottom of the hill, the bushes, and it's,
Getting there.
you can't hardly walk by.
Did you talk to Kevin
And
about
there's-
that sidewalk?
I have not yet. I will.
There's another place up by, going up over,
What do you call that hill?
yeah, yep, I know the name.
Going by.
There, by Dwayne and-
Davis's.
Dwayne and Ferris, where the apple trees are growing out,
Mhm.
just before you get to there, it's kind of, the apple trees are growing out, they need to be trimmed.
Mm.
I don't know if that's up to the homeowner.
It'd be nice if it was.
I mean, I think it's Coughlin's property. And just one more thing, there are some weed whackers that are in jail that the Parks Commission, we don't really need them. There's, I don't know how many there are, but Peter recommended that maybe either offer them up to the town crew, or
I'll buy one for a dollar.
you want one?
I,
I'll
ass-
buy one for a dollar.
I assume those were there when Bodine was organizing, and I don't know why or how many have been acquired, but, you know, when they had the volunteer crews
Right.
come, that they could give more than just one person a weed whacker to go.
But he doesn't think they're even probably any good. So if you want to take a look at them with Peter, that would be Peter Richards. He knows way more about weed whackers than I do.
You want to know?
And I don't want to know about them, but that would be good. We could, because we'd like to clean that space out, make it a little bit more tidy.
Okay,
Anything else? I move we adjourn.
Second,
All those in favor? All those in favor, ideas.